Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Good evening and welcome once again to Conversations Across Time. As you can tell, if you're a regular viewer, we are in a different backdrop because this is, again, not a tutorial but an explanation, by way of explanation in terms of the last 4 episodes that we've done on Conversations Across Time, talking about when will we ever learn lessons not learned. And so joining us for this important discussion tonight, once again, is Secretary Robert McNamara. Welcome, Secretary McNamara.
Welcome. Thank you.
I'm pretty sure this is going to be a heated show because there's so much that's been happening in the news lately. And seated to my left is, of course, the show historian Mark Hoffman. And if you've noticed, Mark played General de Gaulle on the preceding 4 episodes. So we thought it would be important for the audience for us to do an exposition and explanation of current events and how they are impacted by history. So I think, Mark, we're going to defer to you as the historian to let you give some of a backdrop. And I guess I should also mention the Atlantic. Most of you who are regular viewers are probably subscribers to the Atlantic magazine. So there was a long, seminal argument, or I want to say article, not argument, regarding the Obama doctrine. And we thought it's so important for what we do here at Conversations Across Time, especially as how it ties in with our last 4 episodes of When Will We Ever Learn. So this is actually episode 5, and I just wanted to make certain that we acknowledge that a lot of the energy for these next shows are coming from what Mr. Goldberg, Jeff Goldberg in the Atlantic magazine pointed out. So, Mark, you want to?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to be the historian because I didn't have to shave my beard to be the bull again. So I'm really happy. Thank you so much. But anyway, when I introduced the show, When Will We Ever Learn with de Gaulle and Secretary McNamara Machiavelli, one of the things I said in my introduction was that Obama has learned and Bush and some of the other presidents have not learned. And basically, Obama's doctrine on foreign policy is based on his learning from the mistakes of Vietnam and other military and diplomatic errors that we made in trying to set a policy for our country that is more in line with what is going on and to the best interests of the country. So basically, I'm going to outline what the Obama doctrine is. Basically, President Obama believes that we can't put troops on the ground and get involved in any type of military activity in the Middle East. That would not be in our best interest, even though we have to stem ISIS. He believes the future lies in improving relations with the Pacific Rim, namely Japan and China, Africa and Latin America, and one of the main bases of his foreign policy is to stop nuclear proliferation. Therefore, the treaty with Iran that he's been criticized about, but that Obama knows in the long run is to the best interest of the United States and the world. And the other thing Obama constantly says is, you don't have to have credibility all the time. Just because one country does something, you don't have to respond with military action. And I think if I quote directly from the article is, he says, you don't have to drop bombs to tell other people that you have bombs. And I think in the summary, that's basically what his policy is. And he's been criticized very, very vigorously by Republicans, which is not a surprise, but by some of the members of his own team, including at some point Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. So we can start the discussion with that as an overview. And let me just ask Secretary McNamara, what do you think of the Obama doctrine?
I think the Obama doctrine is a common sense rationale is certainly needed. And I think it took somebody like Obama, who is a scholar and not just a politician, to view all of these things that happened in the past, and most specifically in our lifetime, we're talking about the mistakes that were made in the war in Vietnam, which we've already discussed, and which I was part of course, and the same mistakes that were made when we went into Iraq, and the destruction that caused, and the turmoil that's been caused as a result of that. I think there had to be a change, and he happens to be the right person at the right time for that. Now, you mentioned he's taken a lot of heat for it, and he has, and certainly you would expect it from the neocons that forced us into Iraq, and the right-wing Republicans, and even all the Republicans, because he's Obama, and they're against everything he does. But he's also taken a tremendous amount of flack from people not only in his administration, like Kerry, like Clinton, but also, most recently, 50 members of the State Department signed a paper saying that they were not in favor of his policy that's going on right now in Syria. And I think we have to discuss that, the Syrian experience,
Yes.
and how his doctrine fits into that, to really put this in a clearer perspective. And let me just say a couple of things about that. And I read the 10-point program that the State Department officials made reference to, who are State Department officials, of course, in the Obama administration, and were against what he's doing, and they feel that his policy has led to this tremendous immigration problem and so forth. And I know that Hillary was always in favor of a no-fly zone and to exert more pressure on Assad. Now, I know it, and I think that Obama wants Assad to go. There's no question about that. But I think he and we are in a very delicate position there, because there's so many competing and conflicting interests.
Yes.
When you look at Assad, Assad's being supported by the Russians. Well, the Russians are also fighting ISIS, who we're fighting.
We do have a map that shows Syria today. Because I want you to look at that. You see over on the left of the map, it says Tartus, which it actually is on, Tartus is on the Mediterranean Sea. Are you aware, and I know you are, sir,
Yes.
that Russia, since 1971, has paid the government of Syria for access to warm water to the Mediterranean through Tartus? Now, the reason that becomes particularly interesting today is because this started in 1971. When it was the Soviet Union, they were dredging the port at Tartus because Russia needed access to warm water. They were dredging the port at Tartus, and they have paid a stipend to Syria. So when
billions and billions of dollars.
Billions of dollars. They forgave Syria's debt, I think, for $9 billion. And they have paid to this country money for access to a warm water port. So when we hear all of this happening in Syria today, in 2015, we are hearing about what's going on in Syria.
Well, the government that we paid it to is directly related to Assad.
Yes.
So it's in Russia's interest. They don't want another government there that they'll have to pay another $9 billion to or forgive debts. So that's their interest, their commercial
yes, they're
and
acting in
security
their imperial interest, just as we are in maintaining the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal has been in our interest, just as the Port of Tarsus has been in Russia's interest. It's no different and no better. Therefore, why is it that why is Russia's interest in Tartus? No, please. Why is Tartus's interest in why is the Russian interest in Tartus good and the American interest in the Panama Canal bad? Please answer that.
We agree with you.
We agree with you. We agree with you. That's exactly the point. Why is it that when Russia advanced its commercial interests, there's something wrong with that? But
right,
when
they're villains. They're crazy.
Exactly. But when the United States does that,
then that's good.
We have to advance our interests just as Russia advances interests.
So then why
There's no sense of charity, madam.
Why are we painting Putin as half crazy and the things that he's doing as completely apolitical, that has nothing to do with us, and it has everything to do with us?
Have you seen him, madam, posing half naked into Siberia? I mean, the man is obviously not stable.
Well, who's the world power?
Well, I
or
think
the person?
Siberia could rattle anyone.
Who's really? Who's
Well, I
really
spent some
stable?
time in Siberia in the Gulag when I was sentenced to death, so I
Yeah.
kind of know a little bit about it. And
Sentenced to death.
yeah, I was sentenced to death by the Tsar, and they commuted the sentence.
Well,
I
they
was
did a terrible job of executing you.
but
They
anyway,
couldn't find the drugs.
let me ask you this, Mr. Secretary.
Yes.
In the geopolitical world, and you talked about Putin being crazy, and since many of my novels dealt with the psychology of the characters and their motivations, I might say that all the world leaders are crazy.
Yes,
What would you say to that?
yes,
I suppose
Yeah.
we're all fiddling while Rome burns.
Exactly.
yes.
They're probably, more than likely, they're acting in what they consider their nation's self-interest. I can appreciate that.
Well, that might be a little crazy,
How so, sir?
because it may lead to the destruction of mankind, which you were willing to do with your brinkmanship.
What brinkmanship?
That was your policy, wasn't it, to bring the world to the brink of nuclear war if we couldn't get what we wanted?
Couldn't you understand that we were fighting communism?
Iran is in there, and they're supporting Assad. And Iran, by the way, is also fighting ISIS, is certainly in Iraq, and led to the downfall of Fallujah, the taking back of Fallujah for Iraq. So he's in a situation where I think it's almost impossible for him to really put more energy into the fight against Assad and to let this thing play out. And then when it plays out, then diplomatically do whatever he thinks is necessary to do. Hopefully it will play out, and it will play out in the near future, because hundreds of thousands of Syrians have been killed. Millions of Syrians have left and impacted the politics of all of the countries in Europe.
Yes.
And the Brexit problem, which just happened, Britain leaving the European Union, may not have been a direct result, but certainly came to play in a lot of the votes that were in favor of that. So I think that we have to discuss that, and what he could have done or what he shouldn't have done, and whether what he has done is the right way to go. First of all, above everything else, the fact that American soldiers have not been getting killed in conflicts in the Middle East or anywhere else for that matter, I think is a feather in his cap. And it shows in his favorability rating now. I mean, he was never his rating was never very, very high, and was below 50% for almost
For a
the
very
entire
long time,
for the
yes.
entire term of his presidency until now. And I think it's about 55 or 56% now, which is amongst the highest of presidents that are at this particular point in his term. And
Are
I
you
think
thinking that that's connected to the fact that he didn't?
I am, and I
That he
say
didn't
that
put boots on the ground in Syria.
absolutely. I
Okay.
think
And
so.
I agree with you. I just want to make sure
I mean,
for our audience. I don't
you
want
know,
to
I
assume
saw the
they know.
statistics last year, and I think 11 members of the military, 11 last year, were killed. Of course, that's
Still
horrible.
too high.
It's
Yes.
horrible,
Yes.
but it wasn't 11,000.
Exactly.
And there aren't boys coming back without legs and arms. I mean, so, and I think that has played into the public opinion. I don't think the majority of people in this country don't want boots on the ground in the Middle East. And I think when we talk about the Middle East later, we'll talk about how less important
Yes.
the Middle East
They're not
is, and
as- they're not as
especially
important as they
in
will be.
part of the Obama doctrine. I mean, he looks down the road and he sees that the Middle East in toto is not going to be the giant important player that it's been in the past. We're no longer dependent on their oil, which was always a major, major element in our support of Saudi Arabia, of the other oil-producing countries. We don't have to worry about that anymore, because we're on the cusp of energy independence. We're also moving away from oil into
Other
cleaner
yes.
sources of fuel.
But one
So
of-
all of these things, I think, are things that we have to discuss.
And one of the things that's important about that with the energy independence is that as we move towards not being that dependent on oil, the amount that we need, I think Saudi Arabia is afraid that the small amount of oil that we will need in the future we'll be getting from Iran, which is their sworn enemy.
And as we don't need more oil, the Middle East, as the Secretary
That's right,
so
less
eloquently
important.
stated, become less and less important. And I think that President Obama is looking at the long term and he doesn't see the Middle East as being in the critical interest of the United States. Yet, every move he makes, being no matter how large or how small, he gets totally criticized for, and nobody wants to think about the long-range implications of his policy. And in my opinion, if the Iranian treaty works and there's less and less proliferation of nuclear weapons, Obama will go down as one of the greatest presidents in American history.
Well, you know, I'm not prepared to say that now, but I think that, along with the other things that he's done, that'll be part of his legacy. I mean, you have to look at pulling the troops out, of taking the boots off the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, his position in Syria, the nuclear treaty. But what about the Pacific Trade Agreement? I know it's getting a lot of play now.
No, that's also very important.
You know, but what's not being said about the Pacific Trade Agreement, first of all, free trade helps the industries in the United States because it opens up areas for them to sell their goods. And the more goods they sell, the more people will go to work. So it's a benefit. It also has isolated China. Now, China has hurt us economically because they throw cheap steel at us. They put up tariffs for certain things that we can't sell
and
there.
Industrial espionage.
But what we've done here in this Pacific Treaty is we've incorporated all those other countries in Southeast Asia, and China's not part of that treaty. So we've isolated
and China's going to, if they feel the pressure, they'll have to come around.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
But and then you talk about the Climate Control Treaty, which hundreds of countries really signed in on, including China, by the way.
That's really important.
And China has already taken steps, and they're the biggest polluter in the world,
that's right.
and they've already taken steps to cut back on pollution. And by the way, Republicans, some Republicans, the one that's running for president especially, says it's a hoax. Well, you know, science says it's not a hoax and it's real, and so do all these other countries. He also, wait, let me just finish with his legacy because I think it's important. He's also reestablished relations with Cuba. And, you know, we talked about Cuba and the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know, that was prior to the Vietnam, which is an amazing thing. And I know there's some Cuba exiles in the States that are against that, you know, for a lot of good reasons. But it's a show that Cuba is being brought back into the international community. And he went to Vietnam and established trade relations with Vietnam. And I know, again, his critics said, oh, this is an apologist tour. That's a lot of junk. I mean, he's bringing these people back into the international community. And as bad as people say internationalism and globalization is terrible, it's really the way of the world in the future because it is a very, very small world. And I think his ratings, I think,
reflect that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And one other thing, and I want this is, I thought it got very little press, but I thought it was incredibly important. Boeing, one of the largest companies in our country, signed an agreement with Iran to build private jets for Iran. In other words, Iran is coming back into commerce with us.
Yes.
Now, that's incredibly important because they're the largest country.
Why do you think it hasn't been, I mean, because you're right, it didn't get any press.
I don't understand that. I think that, first of all, it didn't get any critical press, first of all. It did get some press, and I think it's really a monumental development in this whole history. And I think the Iran nuclear treaty had a lot to do with it, obviously, by negotiating with them, which we never even spoke to them. We haven't spoken to them since 1979. So, I mean, all of these things are amazing in my view. And keep in mind that I was around, for a long time.
You have a vested interest in
exactly. And I think it's really amazing. And what it's shown me is that, we did learn from our mistakes, and certainly he learned from our mistakes. Now, are the rest of the people in the United States ready to learn from our mistakes?
Or are some of the other candidates who are running willing to learn and continue his legacy? Because one of the things, we'll talk about the red line in Syria.
Right.
And Obama, in fact, in the article, and Mr. Goldberg interviews him, Obama's most proud that he didn't attack Syria because of the red line.
Absolutely.
And he accomplished the goal. Putin got involved, and we were able to get rid of the chemical weapons without war, without boots on the ground.
Well, that's part of this conflict I just talked
exactly.
about.
Yes. But he was criticized
roundly.
Roundly.
Oh, sure.
because
said it was feckless and
American
weak.
credibility is at stake. He made a statement, and they defied him, and he didn't back it up, and all this. And he said, you don't have to back it up if they know that you can back it up in the future. And and the outcome worked. There's no more chemical weapons.
But he did back it up. But he didn't back it up with military power.
Well, that's what I meant, and that's what he was saying.
He backed it up with diplomacy.
Exactly.
And he used Putin to do it.
Exactly.
So
That's-
now when
that's a
people
big
say, well,
deal.
why don't you bomb Assad? Well, Putin's on Assad's side. What are we going to do, get
But
into a war with Russia over that? That's not worth
to me, that's more strategic thinking and
Yes.
long-range
Absolutely.
thinking than some of the other presidents and some of the advisors who have knee-jerk reactions to things that happen. And I think Vivienne made a very, very interesting observation about Orlando and some of the other things that happened and how Obama, has been criticized. If you want to
yes.
expand on that.
There's been this criticism because, as we all know, very recently in Orlando, there was a mass killing, the largest mass shooting in this country's history. Now, what's interesting to me is that even though the perpetrator said that he had allegiance to ISIS, turns out he has no connection to any organization. And also what we are learning, which I suspected from the very beginning, is that this was a self-loathing man who was a closeted gay man who so much loathed himself, and because he frequented gay clubs. But that fundamentalist teaching, which, by the way, we've had all kinds of scholars, Islamic scholars, to say there is no basis in the Quran for the homophobia that is expressed within these fundamentalist people who espouse that they are Muslim. So, at any rate, you have a person who is self-loathing. He needs to strike out against his own culture, but the way that he does it is he doesn't own up that he's doing this because he can't express that he's gay and he'd like to be a gay man. So he has to go and destroy some gay people who are comfortable and happy in their sexual identity, and then say that, well, I'm doing this in the name of ISIS. So that's just.
But
yes,
I don't
please,
mean to
no,
interrupt you,
please
but,
interrupt. That's what this is a conversation.
The Republican candidate Trump immediately blamed
Yes.
Orlando on President Obama's foreign policy, and Senator John McCain jumped in and blamed Orlando.
Wonder why they don't blame the NRA.
Well, let me just say
First of all, when they blamed the assassin, the shooter, being a member of ISIS, he also articulated that he favored Hezbollah, and ISIS are mortal enemies, so you can't be on both sides. So right away you should have known this
Something
guy's
is wrong.
right, something's wrong. But to criticize foreign policy because of an incident, said, well, if he had stuck up to enforce the red line in Syria, we wouldn't have had Orlando, or if he had done this, we wouldn't have had Paris, France, is ridiculous, and yet that's what they do. And I mean, I expected candidate Trump to do that, but John McCain, Senator McCain, to blame a tragedy in Orlando on Obama's foreign policy is totally ridiculous.
Well, first of all, let's put this in perspective. Senator McCain, and I'm not defending Senator McCain for what he said, but Senator McCain is in a very, very difficult re-election
Yes.
in Arizona, and he has to separate himself from other people
Anything
and
that
Democrats
represents- Yes.
and other Republicans to hopefully win that election. So he did back off of it, by the way. I mean, he did walk it down, and it was a terrible thing that he said, because everybody knows wasn't Obama's foreign policy that caused any of this. I mean, if we really want to look at it with a clear eye, all of this turmoil in the Mideast, all of it was caused by the incursion in Iraq and the dismantling of the Iraqi forces that culminated as a result of that incursion, which eventually became ISIS, and the spring, the Arab Spring, which caused revolutions in Egypt, in Libya, in Syria, all as a consequence of that of that
Incursions.
invasion.
I think on one of the shows, Secretary McNamara, you quoted Secretary Powell saying
Yes.
about, I think that, I don't want to
if you break
misquote
it,
you,
you own
but
If you go in there, you own it.
yeah, exactly.
And that's exactly what happened.
That's what happened.
He was very, very clear-headed when he said that, and he meant it, and he knew it, and that's exactly what happened. That was the most profound thing that was said during that whole period, during whether we should
The
go
lead up to
into
Iraq?
weapons of mass destruction, all that crap. What he said, you go in there, you own it. Now, what he learned, what Powell learned, was from Bush's father back in '91, when there was an issue with Kuwait, and we came in to protect Kuwait from an incursion by Iraq. And what they did, they went in and they bombed the hell out of their military forces that were streaming from Iraq to Kuwait, destroyed the army, virtually destroyed the army, and backed off. And there were questions then, why didn't you had the perfect opportunity to go in and take Saddam Hussein down. You had destroyed his army and then send it. Enough was enough.
But
he
you know,
did the right thing.
one of the things that the president is often criticized for is his admiration for the policies of Bush 41, George Herbert Walker Bush,
And Scowcroft.
and Brent Scowcroft.
Brent Scowcroft, by the way, just came out against Trump
Yeah.
and for Clinton. I mean, clear-headed people. You have to look at this as these things. So much in politics should be and is not common sense. When you look at rationality and common sense, and you can act on that, that's one thing. But if you act on just people's fears and just try to win an election by playing on people's fears, then you're not really doing the right thing.
Secretary McNamara, one of the things that Mark and I were talking about, you can't base foreign policy on fear, on emotions.
Right.
And I think that might have a lot to do with the fact that Bush 41 knew to back off, which was the intelligent thing to do.
Absolutely.
The fact that he did that, I think that might have a lot to do with why he didn't win a second term. I mean, now, obviously, if he had won a second term, there wouldn't have
But
been
when you
President
look back at
Clinton,
his
but-
legacy, I mean,
Yeah.
he certainly was a much better president than his son
Oh,
was.
absolutely. There's no
And-
question.
And that was a major. I don't know of anybody that was killed in that war on our
No.
side. I mean,
And
we
do you
never got
remember-
close enough to getting anybody killed. We were throwing bombs at them, and that was.
But you
that was
remember when they
extent.
surrendered? Some of the Iraqi soldiers, when they surrendered, they put their hands up, put their guns down,
And
They
ran.
didn't- and ran. But as you said, Secretary McNamara, what's important for people to understand is that the fall of Saddam Hussein and the fact of the breaking up of the Iraqi army, the legitimate Iraqi army, is where ISIS comes from.
Right.
Why is that so conveniently overlooked? Why do you think that?
Well, it's overlooked because they want to blame Obama for something.
For
And what they
everything.
can blame Obama, what they try to blame Obama for, was pulling our forces out of Iraq at the time. After all that was over, and after Saddam Hussein was captured and so forth, we pulled our army out of there. What's not mentioned mostly is that Bush was the one that first started that. He wanted to
that's
keep
true.
troops there, like
Yes.
we did in the Second World War in Japan and in Korea and all of those other places to help to settle
A sort of
everything
Marshall
down.
Plan in
exactly.
Iraq.
But what happened was that the party that was then ruling Iraq after that incursion didn't want us there, and they wouldn't guarantee the safety and security and immunity of the American soldiers that would be there to protect them. And under those circumstances, we're not going to put our boys in the way of harm if we don't have to. And Bush was the one that started to pull them out, and then it was right around the time when Obama came in, and Obama just continued the process. But he was for that anyway, and there was no reason to be there. Now, you could never guess or see that this was going to happen, that these soldiers that we decimated and they threw away and would form ISIS and create this caliphate in the Middle East. But who knows? That's crazy things happening and released all the time.
Conversations across time, 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 conversations across time. Conversations across time, conversations across time. Conversations across time, 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 conversations across time.